My son moved to Europe and abandoned my grandson with me. With no money, I asked for $40 for formula, but I sent it to the wrong number. The reply was, "You are a warrior." The next day, $10,000 and a box at my door. My blood froze inside. The morning light, thin and pale, struggled to penetrate the worn lace curtains of Eleanor Vance's small kitchen. It painted weak stripes across the faded linoleum, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, tiny, silent witnesses to a life that had become a study in quiet desperation. At 73, Eleanor, or Ellie as she'd been known in a life that felt a million miles away, found her days governed by the insistent, innocent demands of a 17-month-old. Little Leo, her grandson, was a whirlwind of gurgles and wobbly steps, a joyous anchor in a sea of worry. Today, however, the joy felt perilously close to capsizing. She'd spent the last hour trying to stretch the remains of a single banana into a breakfast substantial enough for a rapidly growing toddler. Leo, oblivious to the precarious state of their finances, cheerfully smeared mashed banana across his high-chair tray, his blue eyes sparkling. He was a perfect picture of cherubic innocence, a constant reminder of the son who dropped him off 6 months ago with a vague promise to get things sorted in Europe and a plane ticket that was a one-way trip to oblivion. David, her only child, had always been good at disappearing, but this time, he'd left a piece of his heart and hers behind. Ellie's gaze drifted to the kitchen counter, to the bright, cheerful label of a half-empty can of baby formula. Her heart sank. Half-empty was an optimistic assessment. It was, she realized with a cold dread that snaked through her veins, almost entirely empty. Just enough for one, maybe 2 more bottles if she was stingy. She picked up the can, turning it over in her hands, as if she could coax more out of it by sheer force of will. The familiar weightlessness confirmed her fear. This was it. The last can. The last drop. Panic, a sensation she hadn't allowed herself to feel in decades, began to prickle at the edges of her composure. She was Eleanor Vance, a woman who had faced down situations that would make most people buckle, but that was a lifetime ago. Now, her biggest challenge was affording basic necessities. The pension was barely enough to cover the mortgage and utilities, and the small savings she'd accumulated over a lifetime of careful budgeting had evaporated in the first few months of caring for Leo. There were no more relatives to call, no hidden stashes, no forgotten emergency funds. She was utterly, completely, terrifyingly broke. "Mama," Leo chirped, pointing a sticky finger at the empty can, misunderstanding its significance. "Nom nom." Ellie swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Not right now, sweetie. Grandma's just figuring things out." She tried David's number again. It rang, and then went straight to voicemail, the same indifferent, pre-recorded message she'd heard 100 times. "Hi, you've reached David. Leave a message." She left another one, her voice carefully modulated to hide the tremor of desperation. "David, honey, it's Mom. Leo needs formula. I don't have enough. Could you please? Anything helps. Just $40 would get us a fresh can. Please call me back." She ended the call, her hand shaking. He wouldn't call back. He never did. There was only one other option. Humiliation. She had to ask for help. But from whom? The kindly old Mrs. Henderson next door, who barely made ends meet herself. Her distant cousin Martha, whose judgmental glances always made Ellie's skin crawl. The thought of admitting her dire circumstances, of revealing the raw, embarrassing truth of her poverty, was almost unbearable. It felt like admitting failure, not just as a grandmother, but as the strong, independent woman she'd always prided herself on being. But Leo needed to eat. With a sigh that felt older than her 73 years, Ellie picked up her ancient flip phone. Her fingers, gnarled with age and a lifetime of hard work, though not the kind of hard work most people imagined, hovered over the keypad. She decided on a distant acquaintance, a woman named Carol from her bridge club, who sometimes boasted about her investments. Carol wouldn't judge, Ellie hoped, not too harshly anyway. She'd just ask for $40, a loan she promised to repay as soon as her next pension check came in. She typed out the message, her thumb stiff and slow. "Hi Carol, it's Ellie. So sorry to bother you, but I'm in a bit of a bind. Would you possibly be able to lend me $40 for Leo's formula? I'll pay you back on the first." She proofread it twice, a meticulous habit ingrained from a past where every detail mattered, then pressed send. A moment later, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She frowned. That was fast. Carol usually took a while to reply. She opened the message. It wasn't from Carol. The number was unfamiliar. And the reply wasn't what she expected. It simply read, "You are a warrior." Ellie stared at the screen, her heart skipping a beat, then thudding violently against her ribs. Who is this? What did it mean? A cold knot of fear began to tighten in her stomach. She hadn't sent the message to Carol. In her haste, her desperation, she must have made a mistake. A single, trembling digit. She'd sent her plea, her most humiliating confession, to a complete stranger. And that stranger, whoever they were, knew something. Something about her. Something she'd buried for decades. The phone slipped from her suddenly clammy hand, clattering onto the worn kitchen counter. The cheerful nom-nom from Leo faded into a distant hum as the cryptic words echoed in her mind. "You are a warrior." Her blood, which had been merely cold moments before, felt like it was beginning to freeze. The next morning, a thin, almost ethereal fog clung to the quiet suburban street, muffling the usual sounds of distant traffic and early birds. Ellie had barely slept. The phrase "you are a warrior" had looped endlessly in her mind, a haunting, unwelcome melody. Who could it be? Had she known them in another life, a life she'd painstakingly erased? Or was it some cruel prank, a stranger mocking her vulnerability? The very thought made her skin crawl. Leo, surprisingly, had slept through the night, a small mercy. His gentle snores had been the only comfort in the suffocating silence of her fear. Now, as the first weak rays of sun began to burn off the mist, she sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, her gaze fixed on the front door, half expecting, she didn't know what. A debt collector? A social worker? A ghost from her past? Then she saw it. On her small, chipped concrete porch, nestled right beside the faded welcome mat, sat a large, rather nondescript cardboard box. It was a standard shipping box, taped securely, without any visible return address or sender information, only her name and address scrawled in neat, block letters. Beside it, almost hidden, was a thick, off-white envelope, equally plain. Ellie's heart gave a sudden, painful lurch. This couldn't be. Not after that message. Slowly, as if approaching a coiled snake, she rose and shuffled to the door, pulling it open just enough to peer out. The street was empty. The fog was still too thick for many cars to be out. No delivery truck. No person. Just the box and the envelope, silent and ominous. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she stepped onto the porch. Her hands trembled as she bent to pick up the envelope first. It felt heavy. Inside, beneath a single, crisp sheet of paper, lay a stack of $100 bills. A thick, perfectly fanned stack. 10 of them. $1,000. Another stack. And another. Her breath hitched. $10,000. $10,000. Cash. Her mind reeled. This was madness. $10,000. More money than she'd seen in decades, certainly more than she'd had in her possession at one time since, well, since before she'd become Eleanor Vance, the quiet grandmother. A wave of nausea washed over her. It wasn't a prank. It was real. And it was terrifying. Why? Who? And most importantly, should she take it? This wasn't a loan from Carol. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Her first instinct, ingrained from years of living in the shadows, was to reject it, to burn it, to make it disappear. But then a soft whimper came from inside the house. Leo. Leo, who needed formula. Leo, who needed clothes and shoes and a doctor's visit she'd been putting off. The moral dilemma was a sharp, agonizing knife twist. Her old self would have tossed it into the nearest river without a second thought. Her new self, the grandmother, the guardian, saw a lifeline. For Leo. Only for Leo. Her hands still shaking, she carried the envelope and the box inside. She placed the cash on the kitchen table, a glaring, almost vulgar testament to her unexpected fortune. Her eyes, however, were drawn to the box. What else lay within its plain cardboard walls? Another test? Another clue? With a hesitant sigh, she found a utility knife in a drawer and carefully slit open the tape. The flaps lifted, revealing a layer of crinkled brown paper. Beneath it, nestled like artifacts in a forgotten tomb, were several items. The first was a stack of old photographs, faded and sepia-toned. Ellie picked up the top one. It showed a group of young people, all dressed in practical, dark clothing, their faces serious, almost grim. And there she was, younger, sharper, her eyes burning with an intensity she hadn't seen in a mirror in decades. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she held what looked like a rifle, its barrel glinting in the sun. Beside her stood a man, broad-shouldered, with a wry smile and eyes that held both humor and a dangerous glint, Marcus. And in the background, partially obscured, a figure she recognized instantly, even though his face was mostly in shadow, the thoughtful, observant eyes of Silas. She dropped the photo as if it had burned her. Her past. Her carefully buried, meticulously erased past, staring back at her. Beneath the photos, she found an old, worn leather bracelet. It was simple, braided, with a small, tarnished silver clasp. Her fingers traced the familiar pattern. It was a symbol, a marker of allegiance, a secret handshake. They had all worn them. Every single one of them. She'd thrown hers away decades ago, or so she thought. Where had this come from? Next, a yellowed newspaper clipping, folded precisely. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the blurry print. The headline, though old, still hit her like a punch to the gut. Senatorial candidate linked to cover-up. Whistleblower disappears. The date was 40 years ago. The senatorial candidate mentioned was a young, ambitious man named Holden. And the whistleblower was their friend. The one who had vanished. Finally, at the very bottom, nestled among more crinkled paper, was a small, cream-colored note card. In the same neat, block letters as her address on the box, it simply read, "Time has come. They remember." Ellie gasped, a cold, sharp sound that seemed to shatter the fragile peace of her kitchen. The Russian. A language she hadn't spoken, hadn't even thought in since then. This was no random act of kindness. This was a message. A summons. A chilling reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always found a way to claw its way back to the surface. Her peaceful, quiet life, the one she had painstakingly built brick by brick, lay in ruins around her, exposed by a single, desperate text message and the unwelcome generosity of a ghost. The world she thought she'd escaped had found her. And it wanted her back. This wasn't just a gift. It was a declaration of war. A war she thought she'd already fought and won. The quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock her. The scent of stale coffee filled the air. And the terrifying realization settled in her bones. This was just the beginning. The game had begun anew, and she, Eleanor Vance, the retired warrior, was once again a pawn. Or perhaps a queen. Ellie sat at her kitchen table, the $10,000 a gleaming, alien stack on the chipped formica. The photographs, the old bracelet, the newspaper clipping, and that chilling note, all spread out before her like a tableau of a life she'd meticulously embalmed and buried. Leo's soft babbling from his playpen in the living room was the only sound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of fear and confusion in her mind. Who sent this? She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a distant relative, having heard of her plight, anonymously sending help? But the money was too much, too precise, too professional. And the contents of the box? No relative knew of that life. No living relative, anyway. Her gaze drifted to the photographs again. Young faces, hardened by purpose, by danger. She saw herself lean and sharp, a ghost with eyes that knew too much. She remembered the adrenaline, the calculated risks, the unwavering belief in their cause. They had called themselves the Guardians, a self-appointed group of idealists, former military, intelligence operatives, and ordinary citizens, united by a fierce desire to expose corruption and injustice. They moved in the shadows, fighting a war no one knew was being waged. And then, it had all fallen apart. Betrayal. Disillusionment. Deaths. She'd walked away, not in defeat, but in quiet, resolute retreat, vowing to find a peace she'd never known. She had sought anonymity in a small town, a simple house, a life defined by bingo nights and baking cookies, not covert operations and whispered codes. But now the past wasn't just knocking, it was kicking down the door. She picked up the leather bracelet, the symbol of their unity. The leather was soft, worn smooth in places, the silver clasp dulled with age. She remembered the day she received hers, the solemn oath they'd taken. A brotherhood, a family forged in fire. And now, a reminder of what she had lost and what she had become. The newspaper clipping was harder to look at. Holden. Even then, he was a senator-in-waiting, charming, ambitious, ruthless. They had been close to exposing his ties to an international drug cartel, a network that stretched from the highest echelons of power down to the grimiest back alleys. They'd had a whistleblower, a brave young analyst named Anya, who had risked everything to expose him. Anya, who had disappeared. The official report had called it a tragic accident. Ellie knew better. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The note. They remember. Who? Holden's people? Or her own? Was this a warning or a call to arms? Or both? She spent the day in a haze, the scent of baby powder and banana competing with the lingering metallic tang of fear. She tried to make sense of it all, sifting through memories she'd long suppressed. Training exercises in abandoned warehouses. The scent of gunpowder and rain. The quiet click of a silenced weapon. The intricate dance of surveillance and counter-surveillance. She shook her head, trying to dislodge the images. This was ridiculous. She was an old woman. Her joints ached, her eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and her strongest weapon now was a well-aimed glare. She couldn't go back. She wouldn't. Not when Leo was here. Driven by a desperate need for answers, she used the unexpected influx of cash to buy a cheap burner phone and a prepaid SIM card, a small part of her remembering the old protocols. She tried to trace the number that had sent the message. It was, as she half expected, untraceable. A dead end. The sender was a ghost, a professional. Someone who knew how to cover their tracks. Just like she used to. As dusk settled, painting the kitchen in hues of gray and purple, Ellie went to the window, pulling back the lace curtain just a fraction. The street was quiet, the houses dark rectangles against the fading light. Then she saw it. A car. A dark sedan, a model she didn't immediately recognize, expensive looking. It was parked 2 houses down, on the opposite side of the street, facing away from her house. Too far to make out details, but close enough to feel observed. It had been there for a while, she realized, a faint prickle of unease turning into a sharp jab of certainty. It wasn't just parked. It was watching. Her breath hitched. A tremor started in her hands, not from age, but from a deeply ingrained instinct. Her eyes, despite their 73 years, scanned the car, then the surrounding houses, the shadows, the corners of the street. Too neat. Too still. The kind of still that meant something was waiting. The quiet, unassuming house she'd called home for 4 decades suddenly felt exposed, fragile. Her illusion of safety shattered into a million pieces. The past wasn't just remembering. It was here. On her street. Watching her. And in that moment, a flicker of something long dormant ignited within her. A spark of the warrior she once was. Fear, yes, but also a growing sense of defiance. They had found her, but they had also underestimated her. She was old, yes, but she was not broken. And she had Leo to protect. The dark sedan vanished by morning, leaving only a lingering chill in Ellie's heart. She told herself it was her imagination, a phantom conjured by fear and a restless night. But the warrior she had once been knew better. Instinct, sharp and unforgiving, whispered that she was no longer alone in her carefully constructed solitude. She tried to maintain her routine for Leo's sake, but every mundane task felt infused with a new, unsettling awareness. As she meticulously prepared his oatmeal, her eyes darted to the window, scanning the street. While she changed his diaper, her ears strained for any unusual sound. The cheerful gurgles of her grandson, once a source of pure joy, now seemed to mask a deeper, more insidious silence. Nights were the hardest. After Leo was finally asleep, the house, usually a haven of quiet, became a canvas for her overactive senses. She would sit in the dim light of the living room, the photographs from the box spread out on the coffee table, a silent council of ghosts. She traced the faces, remembered the names, the missions, the betrayals. She relived the arguments, the moments of triumph, the crushing defeats. Each memory was a pinprick, reminding her of the life she'd traded for peace. The note lay beside the pictures, a constant, chilling refrain. Was it her former allies remembering their oath, or her enemies remembering their old vendettas? The ambiguity was a torment. But the cash and the car spoke volumes. Someone powerful knew where she was, knew who she was, and was making a move. Days bled into a week, each one tightening the invisible net around her. The first subtle signs began to emerge, so faint they might have been dismissed by anyone else. But not by Ellie. One morning, the small potted geranium she kept on her porch, usually leaning slightly to the right, was perfectly centered. A small detail, insignificant to most. But Ellie remembered exactly how she'd left it after watering. Someone had moved it. Another afternoon, she found the kitchen window, which she always double-checked before leaving the house, ever so slightly ajar. Not enough for anyone to get in, but enough to notice, enough to suggest a hurried exit or a quick, subtle entry. The latch, she noted, was subtly scratched. Not a break-in, but a clumsy attempt at stealth. An amateur? Or someone trying to appear so? Then there were the sounds. Faint rustlings in the bushes at night, just beyond her property line. A car that seemed to drive by her house a little too slowly, a little too often. The unfamiliar chime of an incoming text on her old flip phone, a number she didn't recognize, quickly deleted, leaving no message. These weren't the signs of a casual observer. These were the hallmarks of surveillance. They were testing her, watching her, seeing if she'd noticed. And she had. The fear, initially a cold knot, began to morph into something else, a dull, insistent ache of readiness. Her senses, long dulled by routine, began to sharpen. The quiet grandmother was slowly reawakening the predator. She found herself subconsciously analyzing routes, noting potential escape points, assessing the vulnerabilities of her own home. She walked around her small yard, feigning interest in her wilting petunias, but her eyes were scanning the perimeter, searching for disturbed earth, broken twigs, anything out of place. The thought of Leo being caught in this encroaching storm was a torment she couldn't bear. She'd protected him from his irresponsible father, from the harsh realities of their financial struggles. She wouldn't let him be a casualty of her past. He was innocent. He was her reason. One evening, as she was putting Leo down for his nap, she noticed a faint, almost imperceptible scratch on the baseboard beneath his crib. It was new. And beside it, a tiny, almost invisible glint. She knelt, her aged eyes squinting. It was a minuscule piece of reflective metal, barely larger than a speck of dust. Her heart hammered. This wasn't a random scratch. It was a precise, professional mark. Slowly, carefully, her fingers, which had once disarmed bombs and picked locks, probed the slight indentation in the wood. Her breath hitched as she felt it, a small, cold, metallic object expertly wedged into the join between the baseboard and the wall. With a trembling hand, she found a small, old screwdriver and gently, painstakingly, pried it out. It was a listening device. Not a modern, sophisticated bug, but an older model, the kind used decades ago. Small, simple, effective. It confirmed her worst fears. Someone wasn't just watching. Someone was listening. Someone had been inside her home. Her blood truly froze then. The quiet of her house, the sanctity of her home, had been violated. Leo, sleeping soundly in the room above, was no longer safe. The realization solidified her resolve. The warrior was awake. And she would fight. For Leo. For the peace she'd tried to build. And, perhaps, for the ideals she'd once believed in. The game was on. The discovery of the listening device was a cold, brutal shock, yet it also brought a perverse sense of clarity. The fear was still a constant companion, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, familiar edge of defiance. They had breached her sanctuary. They had threatened Leo. That, Ellie knew, was a line no one crossed with a warrior, no matter how old or how long retired. She spent the next few days in a heightened state of alert, sweeping her small home for other intrusions, moving with a ghost-like stealth she hadn't needed in decades. She found another, smaller device embedded in the telephone line, and a tiny pinhole camera cleverly disguised as a knot-in-the-wood grain of the living room wall. They weren't amateurs. They were professionals, and they were thorough. She disabled them all, her old fingers finding a surprising dexterity, a muscle memory she thought long gone. She started carrying the old revolver she'd found in the box, a heavy, cold comfort against her hip, hidden beneath her cardigan. It felt natural, a grim extension of her will. Then, one rainy afternoon, as a late summer storm lashed against her windows, blurring the world outside, there was a knock at the back door. Not the polite, hesitant rap of a neighbor, but a firm, confident series of 3, then 2, then 3 again. A code. A sequence she hadn't heard in 40 years. Ellie froze, her hand instinctively going for the revolver. Leo was asleep in his crib. She moved silently, peering through the small, frosted window beside the door. A figure stood huddled beneath the porch overhang, rain dripping from the brim of a worn fedora. He was tall, broad-shouldered, even in his later years. A long, dark coat obscured most of him, but the way he stood, a subtle shift of weight, the almost imperceptible scanning of his surroundings, was unmistakable. Marcus. Her heart, which had been a drumbeat of fear, now thrummed with a strange mix of apprehension and an undeniable surge of something akin to relief. Marcus. After all these years. She unlatched the door, slowly, cautiously, her eyes searching for any sign of a trap. He met her gaze, his own eyes, though shadowed by the brim of his hat and etched with time, still held the same sharp intelligence, the same weary kindness and that faint, dangerous glint she remembered. His once dark hair was now mostly silver, and his face, though still strong, was a roadmap of a hard-lived life. Ellie, he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly unchanged. Or should I say, Eleanor Vance, the queen of the quiet life? A ghost of a wry smile touched his lips. Marcus, she replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her soul. You took your sweet time. And you're dripping all over my porch. He stepped inside, shaking off the rain with a practiced movement that sent droplets spraying across her linoleum. He didn't seem to care. His eyes, keen and assessing, swept over her, then around the small, cluttered kitchen, lingering for a moment on the high chair and Leo's discarded toys. You look, well, he said, though his eyes told a different story. They saw the lines, the weariness, but also the undimmed fire beneath. For a woman who's been living off the grid for 4 decades, you've kept a remarkably low profile. It was the point, Ellie retorted, holstering her revolver beneath her cardigan with a subtle movement. Unlike some people, I liked my peace. Peace is a luxury, Ellie, especially when you've had a hand in stirring up a hornet's nest, Marcus said, his voice losing its playful edge. He pulled out a chair at her kitchen table, not waiting for an invitation, and sat down with a groan that spoke of old injuries. And that nest is buzzing again. Thanks to Senator Holden. Ellie stiffened at the name. Holden. The newspaper clipping. I assumed as much. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. He's running for governor. Next election. And he's desperate to clean up his past. All the loose ends. All the old stories. And unfortunately, Ellie, you're a pretty significant loose end. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze locking with hers. Holden was never just a corrupt politician. He was deeply entangled with the cartel we tried to expose. He profited from it, then betrayed Anya to them when she got too close. He used his influence to cover up the entire operation. Our operation. And now he's in a position to bury everything permanently and silence anyone who might remember. Why no? Ellie asked, her mind already racing, piecing together the fragments. He's about to be vetted for a new federal appointment if he wins the governorship. They're digging deeper. He needs to make sure there are no skeletons in his closet that can walk and talk. And you, my friend, can talk a lot. About a lot of inconvenient truths. Ellie shook her head. I'm out, Marcus. 40 years. I'm an old woman with a grandson to raise. I have nothing to do with any of this. You sent a text asking for money, didn't you? Marcus's eyes held hers, unwavering. To a number that, by pure coincidence, belonged to Silas. He's been keeping tabs on all of us. And he recognized the desperation in your message. He knew. He knew your quiet life was just a mask, Ellie. He knew you were still a warrior beneath it all. That's why the money. That's why the box. It was a test. And a warning. He paused, letting the words sink in. Holden is actively hunting down anyone connected to that old operation. Witnesses, sources, anyone who might have documentation. Our old safe houses have been compromised. Former contacts are disappearing. He's systematically eliminating every last shred of evidence, every person who knows the truth about his past. Ellie felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. And you think I can stop him? Look at me, Marcus. My hands shake when I pour coffee. I barely remember my own grocery list. I saw the way you handled that bug, Marcus said softly, his eyes glinting. And the camera. Your instincts are still there. Dormant, but not dead. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But here's the thing, Ellie. Holden isn't just going after the old guard. He's going after anyone who might be in a position to remember. And if he finds out about Leo, your grandson, the innocent little boy who depends on you, who connects you directly to David, who was also briefly involved, he becomes a liability. A target. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A target. The image of Leo, smiling, innocent, oblivious, flashed before her eyes. That was it. That was the line. Not her life, not her past, but his future. Marcus watched her, reading the shift in her expression, the hardening of her jaw. You walked away once, Ellie, to protect your peace. Now you have to walk back in to protect his. Because if you don't, Holden will come for him. And your quiet life, your peace, your grandson, they'll all be gone. Ellie closed her eyes, a lifetime of choices flashing before her. The thrill of the chase, the cold calculations, the righteous anger that had once fueled her. She had buried that woman deep, but now the grave was open. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice raspy but firm. The tremor was gone. Her eyes, when she opened them, were no longer tired. They held the familiar steel of a warrior who had found her purpose once more. For Leo. Always for Leo. The question, what do you need me to do, hung in the air, a silent oath taken in the quiet intimacy of Ellie's kitchen. It wasn't just a question. It was a surrender, a declaration, a reignition of a spark she thought had long since been extinguished. Marcus watched her, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He'd known she would come back. He'd counted on it. First, he began, his voice low and steady, "We need to secure Leo." Ellie nodded, her gaze drifting to the living room where Leo's contented snores now seemed a distant, fragile sound. That was the hardest part. Leaving him. Leaving the only truly peaceful thing in her life. But Marcus's words echoed in her mind. If you don't, Holden will come for him. She had to protect him, and for now, that meant stepping away. It was a bitter, agonizing truth. Mrs. Henderson, Ellie said, naming her elderly neighbor, a woman of stout constitution and even stouter principles. She dotes on him. I can tell her. I have to go tend to a sick relative out of state. An emergency. It has to be quick. Marcus approved with a curt nod. Good. The less she knows, the safer she and Leo will be. We'll leave you to that. But before you go, you need to remember who you are. Who you were. He pushed himself up from the table, his movements still fluid despite his age. He walked to the old, chipped hutch by the wall, its glass doors filled with knickknacks and sentimental trinkets. His eyes scanned it, then the ceiling above. Ellie watched him, a slow, dawning realization spreading through her. "How did you know?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus turned, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Old habits, Ellie. You never really let go, did you? You just found a better hiding place." He reached up, his fingers expertly feeling along the top edge of the hutch, then pressed a specific spot on the molding. With a faint click, a small, cleverly disguised panel slid open, revealing a shallow compartment. From within, he pulled out a dusty, wooden box. Ellie felt a strange mixture of awe and a faint, almost humorous exasperation. She'd hidden it there decades ago, in a moment of lingering paranoia, a just-in-case that she never truly believed would come. It was a part of her old life she hadn't been able to entirely abandon. He handed her the box. It was heavy, familiar. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the latch. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of objects that were once as integral to her as her own heart. A set of lock-picking tools, delicate and precise, a slim, leather-bound notebook. Its pages filled with cryptic codes and forgotten contacts, a collection of pristine, professionally forged identification documents, names, dates of birth, addresses, each a perfectly crafted phantom life, and finally, a small, elegant .38 caliber snub-nosed revolver, its blued steel. Glinting in the dim light, a stark contrast to the flowery pattern of the velvet. Her hands, which usually fumbled with the remote control, now picked up the lock-picking set with surprising grace. Her fingers, gnarled with arthritis, moved with an almost forgotten nimbleness, testing the tension wrench, selecting a pick. It was like riding a bicycle, a skill so deeply ingrained it bypassed conscious thought. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She ran her thumb over the cool steel of the revolver. She remembered the weight, the kick, the smell of gunpowder. It wasn't about violence for her. It was about precision, about leverage, about making sure the odds were ever so slightly in her favor when they were stacked impossibly high against her. "Looks like your grocery list. Memory isn't the only thing you've been underestimating," Marcus remarked, a genuine smile replacing his usual grim expression. "You're still sharp, Ellie. Sharper than you think." Ellie spent the rest of the afternoon making her arrangements. She packed a small bag for Leo, filled with his favorite blanket, a few toys, and enough formula to last a week. She called Mrs. Henderson, her voice carefully pitched to convey just the right amount of urgency and regret. "My sister, bless her heart, she's taken a turn for the worse. I have to go to Ohio immediately." "I wouldn't ask, but—" Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman who genuinely adored Leo, readily agreed. "Oh, you poor dear. Of course, Ellie. You go, do what you need to. Leo will be just fine with me. We'll bake cookies." Ellie offered a tearful, grateful hug, her eyes meeting Mrs. Henderson's with a sincerity that was both genuine and a profound lie. She pressed a thick wad of the $10,000 into Mrs. Henderson's hand, far more than she needed, but a necessary cushion for Leo's care. "Just for any little things he needs, dear. And don't hesitate to call me, even if I'm busy." She gave Mrs. Henderson the burner phone number. The farewell with Leo was the hardest. She scooped him into her arms, burying her face in his soft hair, inhaling the sweet, comforting scent of baby and innocence. His small, trusting arms wrapped around her neck. "Gamma," he mumbled, his head resting against her shoulder. A tear, hot and heavy, escaped her eye, tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. She couldn't tell him goodbye. Not really. She just held him, memorizing the feel of his tiny body against hers, the warmth of his breath. This was why. This was for him. For his future, a future free from the shadows that had just re-emerged from her past. She handed him over to Mrs. Henderson, forcing a bright, reassuring smile that felt like a painful contortion. "Be a good boy for Mrs. Henderson, sweetie. Grandma will be back before you know it." As she walked back to her house, Marcus waiting patiently by the front door, she didn't look back. She couldn't. The warrior was back, and the warrior didn't look back. The peaceful life was on hold. The mask was off. And Eleanor Vance, the quiet grandmother, had vanished, replaced by Ellie, the guardian, the one who remembered. The one who had always been a warrior. The rain had finally subsided, leaving the asphalt roads gleaming and the air crisp with the scent of wet earth. Ellie, now dressed in practical dark trousers, a loose-fitting jacket, and sturdy walking shoes, clothes pulled from the back of her closet, long forgotten, felt the unfamiliar weight of her old gear. The .38 was snug against her hip, the lock-picking tools a subtle bulge in her pocket. Her movements, initially stiff and hesitant, were slowly regaining a measure of their old efficiency. "All right, Ellie," Marcus said, as they drove away from her quiet street in a nondescript, slightly aged sedan he'd procured. "First order of business, intel. Holden is setting up a new shell corporation to funnel campaign funds, and it's being run out of a private office suite downtown. Our source tells us there's a ledger, a digital one, on a secure server there. It links his current shady dealings directly to the old cartel contacts. If we can get that, it's a powerful piece of the puzzle." Ellie nodded, staring out the window at the familiar urban landscape that now felt alien, viewed through the lens of a mission. "So, a recon and infiltration. Standard ops." "Precisely," Marcus affirmed, a hint of his old self-amusement in his voice. "Though our methods might be a little less agile than they once were." The office building was a sleek, modern structure of glass and steel, towering over the older brick buildings of downtown. Ellie felt a pang of nostalgia for the days when they could scale walls and bypass laser grids with effortless grace. Now, her joints creaked just thinking about a long flight of stairs. "Okay, here's the layout," Marcus explained, pulling out a tablet. "The office is on the 14th floor. Standard security, keycard access, a few cameras in the main lobby. Our source says the server room is heavily protected, but the main office has a window that overlooks an alley. Fire escape, maybe?" Ellie studied the schematics, her mind whirring. "Too obvious. Fire escapes are always bugged or alarmed. We go in through the front. Or rather, I go in through the front." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Ellie, with all due respect, you're not exactly invisible anymore." "Exactly," she retorted, a sharp glint in her eyes. "Who pays attention to an old lady needing directions? Or looking for a lost grandchild?" A mischievous smile, one he hadn't seen in years, played on her lips. "Besides, I'm excellent at looking harmless." They spent an hour casing the building, observing patterns, identifying potential weak points. Ellie watched, not just with her eyes, but with every fiber of her being. The rhythm of the security guards' patrol, the blind spots of the cameras, the comings and goings of the building's occupants. It was like a forgotten language, slowly returning to her. Their plan was simple, if risky. Ellie would enter the building posing as a confused elderly woman, using the distraction to assess the security closer. Marcus would remain outside, acting as her eyes and ears. "Remember, Ellie," Marcus cautioned, as she adjusted her floral scarf, a touch of vibrant color meant to enhance her harmless old lady persona. "We just need eyes on the server. Confirm its location, its type. No heroics yet." "Understood," she replied, her voice calm, a slight tremor in her hands the only betraying sign of her apprehension. This wasn't just about her. This was about Leo. She entered the gleaming lobby, feeling the cool rush of the air conditioning on her skin. The security guard, a burly man with a bored expression, sat behind a desk, scrolling on his phone. Ellie approached him slowly, leaning slightly on her cane, an accessory she'd dug out of her attic, purely for effect. "Excuse me, young man," she began, her voice a little shaky, a little louder than necessary. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I seem to be dreadfully lost. I'm looking for my granddaughter's office. She works in, oh dear, what was the name again? Something about acquisitions? On the, 12th floor." The guard, looking annoyed, reluctantly put down his phone. "Ma'am, this isn't a public building. What's your granddaughter's name?" As he spoke, Ellie's eyes darted around the lobby. She noted the position of the two security cameras, their limited field of vision. The access control panel for the elevators, a small, black screen, beckoned. "Oh, bless your heart, such a kind young man," Ellie rambled, her eyes twinkling with a feigned senility. It's so hard to remember these days." She said she was working for a Senator Holden? Is this that building? The mention of Holden's name made the guard stiffen slightly, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. He seemed momentarily thrown off guard. "No, ma'am, this is not Senator Holden's office." "You must have the wrong building," he said, trying to be firm but clearly flustered. Oh dear, oh dear. Always making trouble, I am," Ellie sighed, patting his arm with a frail hand. As she did, her other hand, hidden beneath her large handbag, deftly brushed against the access control panel. A barely audible click, a flash of red light too quick for the guard to notice. She had copied the keycard data. "Well, thank you anyway, dear." "You've been ever so helpful," she chirped, giving him a confused, benevolent smile. She then shuffled back towards the revolving doors, her mission accomplished. "Holden's got his people here," she murmured into the tiny comms device Marcus had given her as she exited the building. Guard reacted oddly to his name. "Keycard data acquired." "Excellent, Ellie," Marcus's voice crackled in her ear. "Just like old times." "Now, for the server room. The alley exit, second floor. I'll meet you there." The second part of the mission was trickier. Using the copied keycard data, Marcus was able to create a duplicate. Ellie, relying on her skills of observation, knew the guard changed shifts in 15 minutes, during which there was a brief window of relaxed vigilance. She used it. She re-entered the building, taking the elevator this time, her heart thumping a little faster. On the 14th floor, the office suite for the Shell Corporation was discreetly marked. She swiped the copied keycard. The light turned green. Inside, the office was dark and quiet, save for the hum of computers. She moved through it with silent precision, a ghost in her own past. Filing cabinets, desks, a small conference room. No sign of a server room. Then she heard it. A faint click, a shift in the air, from behind a large, unassuming bookshelf. Ellie flattened herself against the wall, her hand instinctively going for the .38. She cursed her age, the slight tremor in her hands, the dimming of her night vision. She was slower, weaker. The bookshelf swung inward, revealing a hidden room. And standing there, bathed in the cool blue light of several server racks, was a figure. Not a man. A woman. Young, sharp, dressed in a sleek, dark suit, her movements precise and unhesitating. She was meticulously uploading data from a small, portable hard drive. It was Vivian. Ellie recognized the type instantly, an operative, ruthless and efficient, utterly devoid of the messy emotions that often complicated their world. She was the mirror image of Ellie's younger self, but without the idealism, without the moral compass that had always, however faintly, guided Ellie. Vivian turned, her head cocked slightly, as if she'd sensed a disturbance in the air. Her eyes, cold and intelligent, landed directly on Ellie. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Well, Vivian purred, her voice low and surprisingly pleasant. "Look what the cat dragged in. The legendary Eleanor Vance. I expected more." She gestured with the hard drive. "Or perhaps less of you." Ellie stood her ground, the .38 a heavy, cold weight in her hand. "You're younger than I expected," she said, her voice steady, despite the sudden surge of adrenaline. "And far too eager." Vivian laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Age is a liability, old woman. The world has moved on. We don't need your dusty ideals anymore." She lunged, not for a weapon, but with a series of quick, calculated moves designed to disarm. Ellie, despite her surprise, reacted. Her years of training kicked in, a lifetime of instinct taking over where speed and strength now failed. She ducked, parried, and used Vivian's own momentum against her, sending her stumbling back against the server racks. But Vivian was fast. She recovered instantly, a small, wicked knife appearing in her hand as if from nowhere. She was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of strikes and thrusts. Ellie, slower, relied on deflection, on anticipation, on the art of making herself a difficult target. She used her cane not as support, but as a defensive tool, parrying blows, creating space. The fight was a brutal, silent ballet of age and youth, experience against raw power. Ellie felt the sting of a shallow cut on her arm, the ache in her bones, but the adrenaline kept her moving. She saw an opening, a momentary lapse in Vivian's aggressive assault, and she seized it. Instead of fighting directly, Ellie used her small frame to duck under Vivian's guard, grabbing a handful of wires from a server rack and yanking them free with surprising force. Sparks flew. The room plunged into near darkness as the servers whined and died. Vivian cursed, momentarily blinded and disoriented. Ellie didn't wait. She turned, sprinted for the exit, her heart hammering, her lungs burning. She was out of practice, slower than she remembered, but her mind, her cunning, was still intact. This wasn't a win, not truly. But it was a retreat, a successful evasion. She burst out of the building, gasping for breath, the taste of rust and adrenaline in her mouth. Marcus was waiting in the car, his face etched with worry. "Ellie, what happened?" he demanded, as she scrambled into the passenger seat. She looked at her bleeding arm, then back at the dark building, a ghost of a defiant smile on her face. "Looks like Holden brought in the next generation. And they're just as eager to clean up his mess." She pulled out the copied keycard, now with the added server data thanks to her quick action. "But they're not as clever as they think. We have a piece of the puzzle. And they know we're coming." The warrior was bruised, but not broken. The game, she realized, had truly begun. The drive to their temporary hideout, an abandoned print shop on the forgotten fringes of the city, was a silent one. The adrenaline that had propelled Ellie through the confrontation with Vivian was slowly receding, leaving her body aching and her mind buzzing. Marcus kept glancing at her, his concern a tangible presence in the cramped car. "You okay, Ellie?" he finally asked, his voice low. She dabbed at the shallow cut on her forearm with a piece of gauze she'd found in his emergency kit. "I've had worse paper cuts," she grumbled, though her hand trembled slightly. The girl's fast. And ruthless. No idealism in those eyes, just cold efficiency. "That's Vivian," Marcus confirmed, his jaw tight. "Holden's personal enforcer. Young, brilliant, and utterly loyal. She's been cleaning up his messes for years. Considered one of the best." Ellie snorted. "Then she needs more practice." "I still got out." They pulled into the darkened alley behind the print shop. The building was a relic, its windows boarded up, its brick facade crumbling. Inside, however, Marcus had set up a surprisingly functional, if Spartan, workspace. A couple of folding chairs, a table laden with laptops and communication gear, and a small cot were all that distinguished it from a forgotten storeroom. The air smelled of old paper and dust. "Let's see what you got," Marcus said, gesturing towards a laptop. Ellie carefully inserted the copied keycard into a reader. The encrypted data transferred quickly. A moment later, a complex network of files and folders appeared on the screen. Marcus, with surprising speed for his age, began to navigate through them, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Ellie watched over his shoulder, her eyes, though weary, still sharp enough to catch the familiar patterns of corporate malfeasance. "Bingo," Marcus muttered, his finger tracing a line on the screen. "A shell corporation, just as we thought. Holding company for campaign contributions. But look at this. These aren't just local donors. These are transfers from offshore accounts. And the names. These are the same front companies the cartel used back then." Ellie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. It was all there. The threads connecting Holden's current ambition to his decades-old treachery. The very same threads they had tried to expose all those years ago. "He's using the same playbook," she whispered, her voice laced with a bitter irony. "Just a bigger stage. And bigger stakes," Marcus added, his face grim. "He's not just trying to fund a campaign. He's trying to build an empire. And anyone who knows the truth about how he started it needs to disappear." Ellie remembered Anya, the brave young analyst who had paid the ultimate price. Her friend. Her comrade. the one they couldn't save. The memory fueled a fresh surge of resolve. This wasn't just about protecting Leo anymore. It was about justice for Anya. As they worked, a small, portable radio on the table crackled to life, tuned to a local news station. The reporter's voice was clipped, urgent. Police are investigating the disappearance of renowned investigative journalist Arthur Jenkins. Jenkins, known for his exposé on political corruption, was last seen leaving his office late Tuesday night. Authorities have found no signs of foul play, but his disappearance is considered suspicious. Ellie and Marcus exchanged a look. Arthur Jenkins. They knew him. He was a dogged reporter, one of the few who still dared to dig into the shadowy underbelly of power. He had been sniffing around Holden for months. Holden's not just sweeping up the past, Ellie said, her voice tight. He's clearing the path for the future. Anyone who gets in his way, old or new. He's becoming bolder, more desperate, Marcus agreed. The federal vetting process must be putting serious pressure on him. He knows we're out there. He knows there are still people who remember. Just then, a small, secure messaging device on the table chirped. It was a single, encrypted message sent to Marcus's private channel. He opened it, his eyes scanning the screen. Silas, he murmured, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. He passed the device to Ellie. The message was short, cryptic, and in their old code. It translated to, "The viper stirs the nest. Its venom reaches high. Old roots still hold." And then, a series of coordinates. What does it mean? Ellie asked, feeling a renewed surge of apprehension. The viper is Holden, Marcus explained. He's making his move, and his influence is spreading. Old roots still hold. That's Silas telling us there are still allies, still loyalists from the old days, who haven't forgotten. And the coordinates. He typed them into a mapping program. That's a safe house. A very old one. Known only to a handful of us. And Silas. Ellie looked at the map. The coordinates pointed to a remote, abandoned cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains. A place they used to use for training, for regrouping. A place she hadn't thought about in 40 years. He wants us to meet someone there, she asked. He wants us to find something there, Marcus corrected, his eyes glinting. Silas has always been a master of the long game. He wouldn't send us to an old safe house unless there was something crucial waiting for us. Something Holden is desperate to keep buried. Ellie looked at the map, then at the stolen data on the laptop screen. The pieces were starting to connect, forming a terrifying, intricate web of corruption that stretched back decades. Holden wasn't just a threat to them. He was a threat to the very ideals they had once fought for. So, Ellie said, a new resolve hardening her features, we go to the mountains. And we find what Silas wants us to find. Before Holden's viper venom reaches us all. The scent of dust and old paper filled the room. But beneath it, Ellie could almost smell the faint, metallic tang of gunpowder. The game was intensifying. And she, the quiet grandmother, was ready for the next move. The journey to the Appalachian safe house was a long, arduous one, a stark reminder of Ellie's age. Her joints ached, and the cramped car ride seemed to amplify every creak and groan of her body. Yet, a different kind of energy, a grim determination, propelled her forward. The further they drove from the city, the closer they got to the wilderness, the more a primal sense of purpose settled in her. This was the landscape of her past, of their training, of the hard lessons learned. As they navigated the winding mountain roads, Marcus kept the radio tuned to a national news channel, the updates on Senator Holden painting an increasingly clear picture of his escalating power grab. He was denouncing radical fringe groups and discredited operatives trying to undermine his patriotic service. The narrative was obvious. He was building a wall of public opinion, painting any opposition as enemies of the state. Then, a local news bulletin cut in, its tone sensationalist and urgent. In a developing story, local police are investigating reports of a child in distress found abandoned in a suburban neighborhood. Ellie's blood ran cold. "Turn it up, Marcus," she snapped, her voice sharp with sudden panic. The reporter's voice filled the car, detailing how an anonymous tip had led authorities to a house where a neglected child was reportedly found. A blurry image flashed on the screen of Marcus's phone, which he was using to stream the news. It was Mrs. Henderson's house. And the description. A toddler, estimated to be around 18 months old, was found in the care of an elderly neighbor, whose own ability to care for the child is now under scrutiny. "He's going after Mrs. Henderson," Ellie gasped, her hands clenching into fists. He knows. He knows about Leo." Marcus's face was grim. "He's trying to discredit you, Ellie. To paint you as an unfit guardian of a reckless, irresponsible old woman who abandoned her grandson. If they can take Leo away, they can break you. And remove your last shield of normalcy. A wave of impotent fury washed over Ellie. This wasn't just a political battle, it was a deeply personal attack. Holden wasn't just threatening her, he was threatening everything she held dear. He was turning her greatest love, her most vulnerable point, into a weapon against her. "We have to go back," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "No," Marcus said firmly, his eyes fixed on the road. "That's exactly what he wants. To draw you out, to force you into the open where his resources can easily overwhelm you. This is a tactic, Ellie. A brutal one, but a tactic nonetheless. Leo is safe with Mrs. Henderson for now. The authorities won't just yank him away without due process, especially with the money you left her. And even if they do, our contacts can make sure he's placed somewhere safe, not in Holden's hands. We have to finish this. For Leo." Ellie closed her eyes, fighting back the surge of despair. He was right. Running back now would be walking straight into Holden's trap. She had to play the long game. The Warriors' game. They finally reached the safe house late that night. It was a rustic, weather-beaten cabin, nestled deep within a dense thicket of pines, almost swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Inside, it was Spartan, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 cots. But it was secure, hidden, and for the first time in days, Ellie felt a faint sense of being off the grid, truly invisible. As Marcus secured the perimeter, Ellie walked through the cabin, her fingers tracing the worn wooden surfaces. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow dancing in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, awakened a flood of memories. This was where Anya had shown them the first incriminating documents, her face alight with righteous anger. This was where they had planned their ill-fated operation, fueled by youthful idealism and a fierce belief in justice. She remembered the feeling of betrayal, the gut-wrenching realization that someone they trusted, someone within their own ranks, had sold them out. It had shattered their group, scattering them to the wind, leaving only a handful of survivors. Holden, they had learned later, was the one who had been tipped off, the one who had orchestrated the accident that claimed Anya's life. The wound, long scabbed over, was now ripped open, raw and bleeding. This wasn't just about a senator anymore. It was about vengeance. For Anya. For the ideals they had sacrificed. "Ellie, come look at this," Marcus called from a back room, his voice tinged with excitement. She joined him in what looked like a small, dusty storeroom. He was kneeling, carefully prying open a loose floorboard. Beneath it, nestled in a waterproof container, was a collection of old files, discs, and a small, leather-bound journal. Silas always had a knack for burying things deep, Marcus said, carefully taking out the journal. "This is Anya's. She kept meticulous notes. Everything she found before she disappeared." Ellie's hands trembled as she took the journal. Anya's handwriting, neat and precise, filled the pages. Dates, names, figures. It was a complete account of Holden's early involvement with the cartel, the money laundering schemes, the political favors, the assassinations. And at the end, a chilling entry detailing her growing suspicion of Holden's true allegiances and her fear for her own life. A final, desperate plea for justice. The files corroborated the journal entries, offering undeniable proof. Financial records, coded communications, names of shell companies, everything needed to expose Holden once and for all. It was the smoking gun they had failed to secure all those years ago. "This is it," Ellie whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. This is what he's been trying to bury. This is why he's hunting us. This is the truth. But the truth came with a heavy cost. Holden's escalating attacks, his willingness to use Leo as leverage, solidified the brutal reality of their situation. They weren't just fighting a corrupt politician, they were fighting a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. "We have to get this out," Marcus said, looking at the evidence. But getting it to the right people, safely, without it being intercepted or discredited, that's the real challenge. Ellie looked at the journal, at Anya's last words. She looked at the darkening forest outside, then at the map coordinates Silas had sent, a silent message from a shadowy ally. The net was tightening around them, but they now held the key to untangling it. The price of their past was high, but the price of inaction, the price of letting Holden win, was far higher. For Anya, for Leo, and for the shattered ideals they still, somehow, believed in. They would not let him win. The cold mountain air of the safe house, tinged with pine and damp earth, did little to cool the fire that now burned within Ellie. Anya's journal was a torch, illuminating the dark corners of Holden's corruption, and the knowledge of Leo's predicament was the fuel. The desperation that had driven her to send that fateful text had transformed into a steely resolve. Holden thought he could break her by threatening her grandson. He had just forged her into a sharper weapon. "We can't just leak this," Ellie stated, tapping the worn cover of Anya's journal. He'll discredit it immediately. Call it a fabrication, a smear campaign by disgruntled radicals. He's already laying the groundwork for that narrative with the news about Leo. Marcus nodded, pacing the small cabin. He controls too many channels, too many loyalists in the media. We need to hit him where it hurts, where he can't spin the truth. "We need the original data," Ellie mused, her eyes distant, already formulating a plan. "Anya's full archive. And we need to present it in a way that's undeniable. Something public. Something that creates enough noise that he can't bury it." Their discussions stretched late into the night, fueled by strong, bitter coffee and the shared weight of their past. They meticulously cross-referenced Anya's journal with the data Ellie had extracted from Holden's Shell Corporation office. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a complete picture of his decades-long criminal enterprise. The key, they realized, was a secondary server, a highly protected black site where Holden stored his most damning secrets. The real ledger, the proof of his cartel dealings, the evidence of Anya's murder. Silas mentioned a black box server, hidden in plain sight, somewhere in the city, Marcus recalled, looking at their old, coded notes. He said it was always tied to a hub, a central location for the cartel's U.S. operations. Ellie remembered. The old docks. The warehouse on Pier 17. It was abandoned after the fire, but it was their primary staging area for years. If a hub existed, it would be there. Their target was set, Pier 17. The plan was audacious, risky, and relied heavily on Ellie's cunning and Marcus's brute force. They would create a diversion, draw out one of Holden's key operatives, ideally Vivian, and use the chaos to infiltrate the warehouse. The goal: locate the black box server and download its contents. The next day, under the cover of early morning fog, they staked out the docks. The warehouse on Pier 17 was a hulking, dilapidated structure, its corrugated steel walls rusting, its windows shattered. It looked utterly abandoned, but Ellie's instincts screamed otherwise. The subtle hum of generators, the faint scent of stale cigarette smoke, the almost imperceptible glint of surveillance cameras hidden in the wreckage. It was all there. "Okay," Marcus whispered into their comms, hidden in Ellie's ear. "I'll create the distraction. Something loud. Something that forces them to react. You go in through the north entrance. There's a loose grate in the foundation, leads to a maintenance tunnel. You should be able to get in that way." "Understood," Ellie replied, her heart thudding a slow, steady rhythm. She was dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, her face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Her old revolver felt like a natural extension of her arm. Marcus's distraction came with a deafening roar and a flash of light, a carefully placed, non-lethal explosive device that ripped through a section of the pier, sending debris flying and alarms wailing. Sirens immediately began to wail in the distance. As security personnel scrambled towards the explosion, Ellie made her move. She located the loose grate, her fingers, though stiff, working with surprising speed to pry it open. The tunnel was dark, smelling of salt water and decay. She moved through it with silent precision, her cane tapping gently to test the ground ahead, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She emerged into the cavernous interior of the warehouse. It was a labyrinth of stacked crates, rusted machinery, and looming shadows. The hum of active servers was a low thrum beneath the general din of the alarms. "I'm in," she whispered into her comms. "Locating server." "Be careful," Ellie, Marcus warned, his voice a little strained. "I think they sent a welcoming committee for you." Just as he spoke, a figure materialized from the shadows ahead. It was Vivian. She stood perfectly still, a phantom in the gloom, her eyes glinting. She wasn't fooled by the diversion. She knew Ellie would try to exploit it. "You're not as subtle as you used to be, old woman," Vivian said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. A small team of armed guards emerged from behind her, their weapons glinting. "Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate your move?" Ellie cursed under her breath. She'd underestimated Holden's resources, or perhaps Vivian's intelligence. This wasn't just a guard. This was a full-blown ambush. "I hoped for better company," Ellie retorted, her hand tightening on the grip of her revolver. "But I suppose you'll do." Vivian laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "It's over, Eleanor. Your generation's time is done. You're obsolete." As Vivian gave a silent signal, the guards advanced. Ellie didn't hesitate. She wouldn't engage them head-on, her body simply wasn't up to it. Instead, she chose chaos. With a sudden, explosive burst of movement, she fired a single shot from her revolver, not at the guards, but at a precariously stacked pile of old barrels. The shot rang out, loud and shocking in the enclosed space, sending the barrels clattering and crashing down, creating a deafening cascade of noise and debris. The guards, momentarily startled, scattered to avoid the falling barrels. In that split second of confusion, Ellie dropped to her knees, rolling behind a large, rusted shipping container. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't fast, but it was effective. "Ellie." Marcus's voice crackled, laced with alarm. "I'm fine," she hissed back, peering around the edge of the container. Vivian was regrouping her men, her face a mask of cold fury. Ellie's mind raced. She couldn't fight them all. But she didn't need to. She just needed a path to the server. She noted a series of heavy chains hanging from the ceiling, once used for lifting cargo. An idea sparked. As Vivian's men cautiously advanced, Ellie took another calculated risk. She fired 2 more shots, deliberately aiming for the rusty supports of a high-stacked platform. The old metal groaned, protesting the sudden impact. With a screech of tortured steel, the platform began to tilt, sending a shower of dust and small debris cascading down. "Move," Vivian yelled, her voice sharp with command, as her men scrambled to avoid the falling hazards. This was her chance. Using the confusion as cover, Ellie moved with surprising agility, darting between crates, a small, gray blur in the dim light. She heard the thud of boots behind her, the shouts of the guards, but she focused on her goal. The server's hum was growing louder, drawing her in like a moth to a flame. She located it behind a reinforced wall, disguised as a utility closet. Vivian's voice, sharp and furious, echoed closer. "She's heading for the server. Don't let her get to it." Ellie didn't have time for finesse. She pulled out a small, specialized device Marcus had given her, a miniature EMP charge, designed to disable electronics for a brief window without destroying them. She slapped it against the lock mechanism of the utility closet door. A faint hum, a flash of blue light, and the electronic lock gave a protesting groan before dying. She yanked the door open. Inside, rows of humming, blinking servers glowed with an eerie light. This was it. The black box. As she frantically plugged in her data drive, downloading the critical information, she heard Vivian's voice, closer now, dangerously close. "She's in, Senator. She's at the black site." Ellie looked up, her heart pounding. Vivian was standing in the doorway, her knife glinting, her face a mask of triumphant fury. Behind her, Marcus crashed through a nearby wall, having evidently engaged in his own chaotic diversion, his face bruised but determined. "Ellie, get out of there!" Marcus roared, drawing their attention just long enough for Ellie to complete the download. A triumphant beep echoed in the small server room. The data was hers. But now she was trapped between Vivian, her armed guards, and a very angry Marcus. "You're too late, old woman," Vivian sneered, advancing, her knife raised. "The data won't do you any good if you're dead." Ellie looked at the data drive, then at Vivian, then at Marcus, who was already engaging the first guard. Her eyes, though weary, held a defiant spark. She might be old, but she was far from dead. And she still had a few tricks left. The triumphant beep of the data drive, signaling the completed download, was a sweet symphony in Ellie's ears, even as Vivian's knife glinted menacingly. Marcus, now fully engaged with two of Holden's armed guards in the main warehouse, roared a warning, his voice raw. The air crackled with tension, the clash of metal and the grunts of exertion echoing around the tight confines of the server room. "You have the data, old woman," Vivian sneered, her eyes fixed on Ellie, ignoring Marcus's struggle for a moment. "But you won't live to use it." She lunged, her movements fluid and deadly, the knife a blur aimed at Ellie's chest. Ellie, despite her age, moved with an instinctive grace honed by decades of survival. She didn't try to block the knife directly. Instead, she twisted, using Vivian's own momentum against her, slamming her cane into Vivian's wrist. The blow wasn't powerful enough to break bone, but it was precise, sending a jarring pain through Vivian's hand. The knife clattered harmlessly to the floor. Vivian gasped, momentarily stunned. But she was too well trained to stay down. She recovered instantly, striking with a swift, open-handed palm heel to Ellie's chin. The blow snapped Ellie's head back, sending a jolt of pain through her neck. Her vision blurred for a second, but her resolve remained unshaken. "Slow," Vivian hissed, regaining her weapon with a quick sweep of her foot. Too slow. Ellie, however, had an advantage Vivian hadn't accounted for: the environment. This wasn't a clean, open space. This was a server room, a cramped, claustrophobic maze of blinking lights, humming machinery, and tangled cables. And Ellie knew how to use chaos. As Vivian closed in again, Ellie spun, grabbing a handful of thick network cables from the back of a server rack. With a sudden, violent yank, she pulled them free. Sparks flew, and the server rack shuddered, its lights flickering erratically. The sudden darkness, followed by the renewed flicker, disoriented Vivian for a precious second. Ellie didn't waste it. She slammed her elbow back, not at Vivian, but at a fire extinguisher hanging on the wall. The extinguisher fell, striking Vivian on the shoulder with a heavy thud. Before Vivian could fully react, Ellie twisted, kicking out with a surprisingly strong leg, aiming for the younger woman's knee. It wasn't a powerful kick, but it was precise, exploiting the momentary imbalance. Vivian stumbled back, her face contorted in pain and surprise. "You really think you can take me?" Vivian snarled, recovering again, her eyes narrowed to slits of pure hatred. "You're a ghost, Eleanor. And it's time you went back to your grave." But Ellie had learned a fundamental truth in her warrior life. Sometimes, you didn't need to defeat your opponent directly. You just needed to outsmart them. Her eyes, darting around the server room, landed on a heavy, reinforced door at the back. An emergency exit, likely leading to a different section of the warehouse or an exterior loading dock. "Marcus, I have the data," Ellie yelled, her voice hoarse, as she began to back away towards the door. "Head for the extraction point." Vivian, hearing the confirmation of the data, roared in frustration. Her attention, which had been solely on Ellie, now split between the escaping old woman and Marcus, who was still holding his own against the guards. She made a split-second decision. The data was the priority. Get her. Vivian shrieked at her remaining guards, abandoning Marcus to their mercies. She launched herself at Ellie, her speed incredible, her knife a silver blur. Ellie, however, was ready. Just as Vivian reached her, Ellie threw a handful of the disconnected network cables at her face. The cables, thick and heavy, tangled around Vivian's head and arms, momentarily blinding and disorienting her again. With a final burst of adrenaline, Ellie reached the emergency exit, fumbling with the heavy bar lock. It was stiff, old. Her fingers, though nimble, struggled. She heard Vivian fighting her way free of the cables, her snarls of frustration growing louder. "Ellie, move." Marcus's voice boomed, closer now. He had disarmed one guard, using the man's own weapon against the other. Just as Vivian tore the cables away, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage, Ellie's hand finally pushed the bar. The heavy door burst open, revealing a grimy, rain-slicked loading dock. Ellie stumbled out, gasping for breath, the cold air a shock to her lungs. Vivian, however, was right behind her. She tackled Ellie from behind, sending them both sprawling onto the wet concrete. The data drive flew from Ellie's grasp, skidding across the ground, dangerously close to the edge of the dock. "The data is mine, old woman," Vivian snarled, pinning Ellie with surprising strength, her knife now pressed against Ellie's throat. "This is where it ends for you." But before Vivian could deliver the final blow, a massive figure descended upon them. Marcus, his face bruised but his eyes burning with fury, had arrived. He slammed into Vivian with the force of a battering ram, sending her flying across the dock. "Nobody," Marcus growled, his voice thick with menace, "touches my family." Vivian landed hard, groaning, but quickly scrambled to her feet, her knife still clutched in her hand. Her face, however, now held a flicker of something new, fear. She was outnumbered. And Marcus was not to be trifled with. Ellie, gasping for air, crawled towards the data drive, snatching it up just as Vivian launched herself at Marcus. The two engaged in a brutal, hand-to-hand struggle, a whirlwind of fists, feet, and the glint of steel. Marcus, older and slower than Vivian, relied on his raw strength and years of street fighting. Vivian, agile and precise, aimed for his weak points, his old injuries. Ellie watched, helpless for a moment, then struggled to her feet. The data was safe, but they needed to get it to its destination. The final act was upon them. They had the proof. Now, they needed to make sure the world saw it. And that meant facing Holden himself. The rain had long since given way to a weak, watery dawn as Marcus helped me to my feet. Vivian lay sprawled on the grimy concrete of the loading dock, disarmed and unconscious, a testament to Marcus's enduring strength. Her guards were scattered, either subdued or in retreat. We had the data. We had survived. But the fight was far from over. "You okay, Ellie?" Marcus asked, his breathing heavy, a fresh cut bleeding above his eye. I clutched the data drive, its cold, smooth plastic a potent symbol of our victory and our remaining challenge. "As okay as a 73-year-old woman who just wrestled a ninja can be," I retorted, a wry, tired smile touching my lips. "But we have to move. Before she wakes up. Before Holden realizes his black box has been picked clean." We left Vivian and her incapacitated guards for the arriving authorities. Anonymous tips from Marcus would ensure they were found. Our focus, however, was singular: how to use this data. The black box contained everything: detailed ledgers of illicit funds, coded communications with known cartel figures, and, most damningly, a chilling audio recording of Holden explicitly ordering the disappearance of Anya, our whistleblower, 40 years ago. It was undeniable proof, finally. "We need a stage," I declared, as Marcus drove us away from the docks, the city slowly awakening around us. A public forum. Something so big, so visible, that he can't possibly spin it. Not with this. I patted the data drive. Marcus's eyes flickered to the news playing silently on his phone mount. "Holden's holding a major press conference this afternoon. A campaign rally, really. Announcing his platform for governor. Televised nationally. It's his big splash." A cold, calculated resolve settled in my chest. "Perfect," I murmured. His grand announcement will be his public execution. Our plan began to coalesce, a desperate, audacious gamble that relied on precision, timing, and a healthy dose of audacity. Marcus, drawing on his network of old contacts and his own knack for infiltration, would secure a direct line to a trusted, independent journalist, someone beyond Holden's reach, with the integrity to air the truth. But getting the data to that journalist, in person, during the live broadcast, was my role. My final, most dangerous act. We spent the next few hours in a furious blur of activity. Back at the print shop, we meticulously organized the downloaded data, creating a clear, concise package that would be easy to understand and impossible to deny. Marcus encrypted it, embedding a time delay release mechanism. If the journalist didn't activate it within a certain window, it would auto-release to a wider network of independent news outlets, a failsafe against suppression. I, meanwhile, worked on my cover. I couldn't go in as Eleanor Vance, the neglectful grandmother. I needed to be utterly forgettable, yet subtly effective. I chose a persona I knew well, the harmless, slightly doddering old lady, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. A simple floral dress, comfortable shoes, a wide-brimmed hat, and, of course, my cane, no longer just a prop, but an essential tool for my aching joints and a potential distraction. The rally is at the convention center, Marcus informed me, reviewing the schematics he'd pulled up. Heavy security, metal detectors, bag checks. They'll be looking for anything out of place. Exactly, I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. And what's more in place than an old woman with a purse and a knitting project? My knitting project was a carefully hollowed-out ball of yarn, concealing the data drive within. My purse contained a few innocuous items, and beneath it all, hidden in a false bottom, a small, voice-activated detonator. Not for explosives, but for a micro-smoke grenade, designed to create a brief, disorienting haze if I needed an emergency escape. Old habits died hard. As the afternoon approached, the tension in the print shop became almost unbearable. News reports flashed across the laptop screen, showcasing Holden's confident pronouncements, his polished rhetoric, his unwavering public support. He was a master manipulator, and we were about to yank the rug out from under his feet on the biggest stage of his life. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely a whisper, as I checked my reflection in a cracked mirror, seeing not Eleanor Vance, but Ellie, the warrior, preparing for her final stand. What if he has another contingency? What if he anticipates this? Marcus looked at me, his eyes grave. He's arrogant, Ellie. He believes he's untouchable. He won't expect us to hit him where it matters most, his public image. He'll expect a direct assault, a physical confrontation. Not this. He patted the data drive in my hand. This is a quiet kill, Ellie. The kind he won't see coming until it's too late. We drove towards the convention center, the city's pulse quickening around us. The streets were already thronged with supporters, waving flags, chanting Holden's name. It was a sea of faces, all eager to witness his ascent. Little did they know, they were about to witness his downfall. As we approached the security checkpoint, a sudden, jarring announcement blared over the loudspeakers. "Attention, attendees. Due to an unforeseen technical issue, Senator Holden's speech will now begin 20 minutes earlier than scheduled. Please proceed to the main hall immediately." My heart leaped into my throat. 20 minutes. A sudden, unexpected shift. It could unravel everything. The timing for the journalist, the public reveal, all of it relied on precise synchronization. "He's moved it up," I hissed into my comms, my carefully cultivated calm threatening to crack. Why? Probably a last-minute decision to avoid any potential disruption. Marcus's voice crackled back, surprisingly steady. He's feeling the pressure. But this helps us. Less time for security to get complacent, more urgency for our journalist. But less time for me, I countered, already adapting. The queue for the metal detectors was long, and the security personnel were now rushing people through with a new urgency. This was a double-edged sword. It meant less scrutiny, but also less opportunity to blend, to be methodical. As I shuffled forward, my cane tapping a nervous rhythm on the polished floor, I saw him. Senator Holden. Not on a stage, not behind a podium, but walking through a side corridor, surrounded by a phalanx of security, heading towards the main entrance of the hall. His face was set, a picture of confident authority. He even paused to wave to a few eager supporters, a practiced, charismatic smile on his lips. He looked directly at me for a split second, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, dismissing me as just another elderly citizen, another adoring fan. He had no idea. The warrior, the ghost from his past, was standing right there, a few yards away, holding the weapon that would bring him down. The unexpected visual of Holden, so close, so confident, sparked a fresh surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just a target. This was the man who had stolen Anya's life, who had threatened Leo's future. The fight was no longer abstract. It was personal. And I was ready for him. The last throw. It had to be perfect. The metal detector buzzed with a sharp, insistent whine as I passed through. The young security guard, flustered by the accelerated schedule, barely glanced at me, waving me through with a distracted flick of his wrist. He was looking for threats, for bombs, for direct assaults. He wasn't looking for an old woman with a knitting project. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my exterior was calm, serene. The knitting project, the hollowed-out ball of yarn with the data drive nestled inside, remained undetected. "You're in, Ellie," Marcus's voice whispered in my ear, a lifeline in the roaring chaos of the convention center. "Journalist is positioned in the press box, aisle 3. He's expecting a package from a confused grandmother. Get it to him." I moved through the surging crowd, a small, gray stream against a powerful current. The main hall was a dazzling expanse of red, white, and blue banners, bright lights, and the deafening roar of applause. Holden was already on the stage, a charismatic figure bathed in the glow of spotlights, his voice booming over the sound system, filling the cavernous space. He spoke of patriotism, of a glorious future, of national unity, a sickeningly false prophet weaving a tapestry of lies. My eyes found the press box, a hive of activity high above the main floor. I scanned the faces, remembering the description Marcus had given me, a man with a tired but honest face, a faint scar above his left eyebrow. There he was, Mark Jensen, a reporter known for his tenacity and integrity, already scribbling furiously in his notebook, oblivious to the bomb I was about to drop in his lap. The challenge wasn't just reaching him, it was doing so subtly, without drawing the attention of the numerous security personnel patrolling the aisles, or, worse, Vivian. I had to look like I belonged, a lost old lady seeking a better view. I began my slow ascent towards the press box, feigning a slight stumble here, a moment of confusion there, apologizing profusely to anyone I bumped into. Each step was a battle against my aching joints, against the growing pressure in my chest. Holden's voice, a relentless drumbeat of deception, echoed around me, fueling my resolve. "And it is with this vision, this commitment to transparency and truth, that I ask for your trust, your vote, your belief in a future free from corruption and deceit." Holden thundered, his arm raised in a triumphant gesture. The crowd roared its approval. My stomach churned. Transparency and truth. The audacity was breathtaking. As I neared the press box, a sharp-eyed security guard, younger and more attentive than the one at the entrance, began to eye me suspiciously. His hand went to his earpiece. My cover was about to be blown. I had to act. "Oh, excuse me, young man," I said, my voice suddenly frail, deliberately dropping my cane. It clattered loudly on the polished concrete floor, drawing the guard's immediate attention. As he bent down, his back momentarily turned to the crowd, to retrieve it for me. My other hand, swift and unseen, reached into my knitting bag. I pulled out the hollowed-out yarn ball, my fingers working quickly to remove the data drive. Just as the guard straightened up, handing me my cane with a polite, if exasperated, smile, I subtly extended my hand, palm up, revealing the small, unassuming data drive. "Excuse me, young man," I said, maintaining my lost grandmother persona, my eyes fixed on Mark Jensen. Are you Mr. Jensen? My grandson gave me this. He said it was very important. For your story." Mark Jensen, who had been watching me approach with a flicker of recognition, saw the data drive. His eyes, though tired, widened in immediate understanding. He knew. Marcus had primed him. Without a word, he quickly, smoothly, took the drive from my hand, his fingers brushing mine in a silent transfer of truth. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet, his eyes already assessing the implications of the small device. "I believe I know exactly what this is." But our moment of triumph was short-lived. A sudden, cold voice cut through the noise, right behind me. "Eleanor Vance. I should have known you couldn't resist." It was Vivian. She stood there, a phantom of fury, her face a mask of barely contained rage. She had recovered. She had followed. And now she was directly behind me, blocking my path, her eyes fixed on the data drive in Mark Jensen's hand. "That's enough, Senator," I said, my voice dropping its feigned frailty, a steel edge returning. I turned to face her, placing myself between her and the journalist. "Your game is over." Vivian laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Your game is over, old woman. Do you honestly think a little data drive can bring down a man like Holden? He owns the truth. He is the truth." Her eyes, cold and merciless, darted to Mark Jensen. "And if you think that data will ever see the light of day, you're mistaken." Suddenly, 3 more of Holden's security men, burly and menacing, appeared from the crowd, moving with practiced efficiency to surround me and Mark Jensen. The net was tightening, dangerously so. "Hand over the drive, old woman," Vivian commanded, her voice low and dangerous. "Or things will get very unpleasant. For you. And for your little journalist friend." Holden, meanwhile, had finished his speech, the last echoes of applause still reverberating through the hall. He began to move towards the edge of the stage, shaking hands, basking in the adoration of his supporters. He was close enough now that I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the slight tremor in his hand as he waved. He hadn't seen us yet, but he was getting closer. "I don't think so," I said, my voice steady, my eyes meeting Vivian's with an unwavering gaze. "The truth has a way of finding its own light." Vivian gave a sharp nod to her men. They began to advance, their hands reaching for me and Jensen. This was it. The final, desperate throw. "Marcus, now!" I yelled into my comms, a command I hoped he could still hear amidst the chaos. Just as the first guard reached for me, a sudden, blinding flash erupted from beneath the stage, followed by a thick, acrid cloud of smoke. My micro-smoke grenade, triggered by Marcus's remote. It wasn't an explosive, just a disorienting, non-lethal burst. Panic erupted in the crowd near the stage. People gasped, screamed, and began to surge backward, away from the smoke. Holden, his face contorted in confusion and alarm, was quickly rushed off stage by his personal security. In the ensuing chaos, with the main stage now obscured by smoke and the security guards momentarily disoriented, I saw my chance. "Run, Jensen. Go," I urged, pushing the startled journalist towards the back exit of the press box. Vivian, momentarily blinded by the smoke, screamed my name in fury. She regained her bearings almost instantly, her eyes, narrowed to slits, zeroing in on me. She knew. She knew I was the source. "You won't get away," she shrieked, launching herself at me, her intent to kill clear in her eyes. But I was ready. This wasn't about escape anymore. This was about buying time. Time for Mark Jensen to get the data out. As Vivian lunged, I raised my cane, not to defend, but to strike, aiming a swift, precise blow to her knee. She cried out in pain, stumbling, giving me a precious extra second. Then, just as she regained her balance, a figure emerged from the swirling smoke beneath the stage. Marcus. He moved like a shadow, swift and brutal. He didn't hesitate. He slammed into Vivian with a powerful tackle, sending her sprawling, knocking her knife from her hand. The two engaged in a desperate, silent struggle amidst the gasps and shouts of the retreating crowd. I didn't wait. My part was done. I had bought Mark Jensen the time he needed. I had delivered the truth. My eyes, however, were fixed on Holden, who was now being half-dragged, half-carried by his security detail towards a hidden exit. Our eyes met across the chaotic hall. His wide with dawning horror and pure, unadulterated hatred. Mine, burning with a quiet, fierce triumph. He knew. He finally knew. The lioness had come for her due. The convention center descended into pandemonium. The smoke, the sudden disruption, the whispered rumors of a security breach, it was enough to shatter Holden's carefully constructed facade. His personal security team, a blur of motion, whisked him away, his face a contorted mask of fury and fear. He had seen me. He knew. I didn't linger. My part in the public spectacle was complete. As Marcus wrestled Vivian into submission amidst the thinning smoke, I slipped away, melting into the chaos, a ghost once more. My body screamed in protest, every joint aching, every muscle screaming from the exertion. But a strange, exhilarating lightness filled me too. It was done. The truth was out. Within hours, the carefully orchestrated silence around Holden began to crack. Mark Jensen, a man of his word, had wasted no time. News alerts, initially cautious, rapidly escalated into full-blown breaking stories. The encrypted data from Anya's black box server, meticulously organized and corroborated by Jensen's own team, hit the airwaves and the internet with devastating force. The audio recording of Holden's order, cold and undeniable, played on a loop across every major news network. The public reaction was immediate and ferocious. Holden's carefully cultivated image of a patriotic leader crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. His past, the dark dealings with the cartel, the orchestrated murder of Anya, his attempts to discredit me and use Leo as leverage, it all exploded into the public consciousness. Calls for his immediate resignation, for his arrest, for a full investigation, erupted across the nation. His career, his political aspirations, his carefully constructed empire, all reduced to ash by the whisper of a data drive. Marcus met me at a predetermined safe house, a tiny, nondescript apartment far from the city center. He was bruised, his clothes torn, but a grim satisfaction shone in his eyes. Vivian, he reported, was in police custody, along with several of Holden's men. Her rage, however, was still palpable. She had sworn vengeance. She won't be a problem for a long time, Marcus said, pouring us both a cup of lukewarm, bitter coffee. They found her knife. And she resisted arrest. Hard. Plus, her connection to Holden is going to be investigated thoroughly. She's burned. I sipped my coffee, the warmth doing little to soothe the chill that had settled in my bones. And Holden? Marcus offered a grim smile. His lawyers are already scrambling. The FBI has opened a full investigation. There are whispers of a grand jury. His political career is over, Ellie. His name will forever be synonymous with corruption and murder. Justice, after all these years. A hollow ache resonated in my chest. Justice. Yes. But it didn't bring Anya back. It didn't erase the years of fear, the decades of hiding. It didn't unthreaten Leo. The victory felt incomplete. Like winning a war, but still seeing the scars of battle all around you. It feels empty, I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. All that for this. Anya is still gone. The world isn't suddenly perfect. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly gentle. Nothing is ever perfect, Ellie. But we stopped him. We exposed him. We reminded them that there are still people willing to fight for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against them. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. You reminded them. You, an old woman they thought was harmless. That's a powerful message, Eleanor. More powerful than any bullet. He then pulled out his secure messaging device. A new message had just come in. He handed it to me. It was from Silas. Short and to the point, as always. You did it, warrior. Your silence is now earned. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor went through me. Silas. The shadowy ally, the one who had set all this in motion, who had recognized the warrior in me when I myself had forgotten her. He was still out there, watching, orchestrating, a guardian from the deep. And he had seen my fight. He had acknowledged it. He's right, Marcus said, seeing the message. Your silence is earned. But I don't think you're going to want to be quite so silent anymore, are you? He was right. Something had shifted within me. The decades of enforced anonymity, the self-imposed exile, had been shattered. I had remembered who I was. And while the idea of returning to a life of quiet peace was still appealing, I knew it could never be the same. The warrior was awake. And she wouldn't simply go back to sleep. Later that evening, as the news continued to blare Holden's downfall, Marcus prepared to leave. He had his own network to tend to, his own shadows to inhabit. "What now, Ellie?" he asked, standing at the door, his silhouette framed against the fading twilight. I looked at him, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. "Now I go home to my grandson. And I make sure he grows up in a world where men like Holden don't always win." I paused, a new thought forming. "But I'll keep your number, Marcus. And this time I won't lose it." He nodded, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. "Good. The world still needs a few good warriors, Ellie. Even old ones." And then he was gone, melting into the night, a shadow among shadows. I was alone again, but not truly. The echoes of my past resonated in the quiet apartment, a constant reminder of who I was and what I had done. The battle was won, but the war, the endless fight for justice, would always be there. And I, Eleanor Vance, the quiet grandmother, now knew I was ready for it, should it ever call again. The drive back to my quiet suburban street felt longer than the journey to the mountains, a winding path through not just physical distance, but through the vast emotional landscape I had traversed. The city lights eventually gave way to the familiar, comforting darkness of my neighborhood, streetlights casting long, gentle shadows over manicured lawns and sleeping houses. My little home, nestled among them, seemed to hum with an almost magnetic pull. I pulled into my driveway, the engine cutting out with a soft sigh. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant bark of a dog. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my gaze fixed on the front door. It looked the same, smelled the same, but I knew, with an undeniable certainty, that nothing inside was truly the same. Not me, not my life. I stepped out of the car, my body stiff and weary, but my spirit felt lighter. Emptier, perhaps, of the decades-long burden of silence, but also fuller, brimming with a renewed sense of self. The revolver was no longer on my hip, it was packed away, a symbol of a readiness I hoped I wouldn't need, but one I wouldn't forget. The data drive, however, remained in my pocket, a tangible reminder of the truth I had unleashed. Mrs. Henderson's house next door was dark, a single porch light casting a warm glow. As I approached her door, a knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. What would I say? How would I explain the past week? The television, I knew, would have been filled with Senator Holden's disgrace, with whispers of old operatives and shadowy figures. Would Mrs. Henderson look at me differently? Would she see the quiet grandmother or the warrior? I took a deep breath and knocked. It wasn't Mrs. Henderson who answered. It was Leo. He stood there, framed in the soft glow of the hallway light, his small face still smudged with sleep, his eyes wide and curious. He wore the little dinosaur pajamas I'd packed for him, his favorite. A wave of overwhelming love, so pure and potent it brought tears to my eyes, washed over me. He was here. He was safe. "Gamma," he squealed, his sleepy confusion instantly replaced by pure joy. He launched himself at me, his small arms wrapping around my legs with surprising strength. I knelt, burying my face in his soft hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. All the aches, all the weariness, all the lingering ghosts of the past week melted away in that moment. This was my anchor. This was my reason. This was my world. Mrs. Henderson appeared behind him, her face creased with concern, then breaking into a relieved smile. "Eleanor." "Oh, thank goodness. We were starting to worry. Everything all right with your sister?" I looked at her, then back at Leo, who was now babbling happily, tugging at my hair. "Yes, Mrs. Henderson," I said, my voice thick with genuine emotion. "Everything is resolved. My sister is doing much better." It wasn't entirely a lie. The sister of my past, the ideals I'd fought for, were indeed feeling much better. She understood, or perhaps, simply chose to believe. She didn't press. She just smiled, her kind eyes full of warmth. "Well, bless your heart. Leo has been a little angel, but I think he's missed his grandma very much. The next few days were a blur of re-establishing routine, of soaking in every moment with Leo. We baked cookies, we built towers with wooden blocks, we read his favorite picture books. But as I watched him play, I saw him with new eyes. Not just as a vulnerable child to be protected, but as a symbol of the future, a reminder of the peace that was possible, that was worth fighting for. The news continued to be dominated by Holden's spiraling downfall. Arrests were made, indictments handed down, and the full extent of his depravity was laid bare for the world to see. Anya's name, for the first time in decades, was publicly cleared, her bravery finally acknowledged. It was a vindication, a small measure of solace for a wound that would never fully heal. I sat on my porch swing one afternoon, watching Leo chase butterflies in the small, overgrown yard. The sun was warm on my face, the scent of blooming jasmine sweet in the air. My hands, once quick and precise with a weapon, now expertly knitted a small, colorful blanket for Leo. The quiet grandmother. The warrior. They were no longer separate entities. They were me. The old woman who had pleaded for $40 was gone. The woman who had believed herself obsolete, invisible, was gone. In her place sat a woman who had faced her past, embraced her true self, and fought for what she believed in, for the people she loved. My wrinkles were still there, my joints still ached, but in my eyes, there was a new depth, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of battle. The box Marcus had left, containing the photographs and the old bracelet, sat on my bedside table. No longer a source of fear, but a reminder. A reminder of who I was, of what I was capable of, and of the price of both silence and action. The mysterious message from Silas, "You did it, warrior. Your silence is now earned," resonated within me. My silence wasn't just earned, it was now a choice. A choice I made not out of fear, but out of a newfound wisdom. I watched Leo stumble and giggle, his tiny hands reaching for a butterfly. He was my new beginning, a promise of a future I had fought to secure. My life would never truly be quiet again, not in the way it once was. The world, I knew, was a dangerous place, filled with men like Holden, always seeking power, always threatening peace. But now I knew I was ready. I was Eleanor Vance, the grandmother, the guardian, and the warrior. And I would always, always protect my own.